All right, so today you're going to be going into energy and cells. This is bouncing off of what we have talked about the last couple of weeks. Today we reviewed mitosis and meiosis. Earlier this week we talked about the cell itself and the organelles inside the plant and the animal cell and what's similar and what is different. Today we're talking about the energy of what that cell needs to survive and to go into that division of reproduction that we talked about yesterday. So cell energy. Energy is energy for living things that comes from food. Every time everyone eats, we get somewhat of a feeling of energy. We're full and we're ready to finish the day off. At lunch, you all are up here. Before lunch, y'all are about down here. Sometimes when some of you all eat sugary foods, you go beyond the Richter. Okay? That food gives us energy. Originally, the energy in food came from the sun, and that sun gave the energy to the plants, and they helped them to grow with photosynthesis. We're going to talk about that later on in the notes. So, food provides molecules that serve as fuel and building materials for all organisms. So, you can see in this cycle below, you have the producer, the consumer, consumers, you have a herbivore that only eats plants and animals, and then you have a consumer omnivore that eats both, and you have your carnivore that just eats meat. We're going to talk about the ecosystem and the levels of organisms later this year, but this is, like I said, you all learned this in 5th grade and a little bit in 6th grade, so we're just building on what you already know. So you can see the soil with the water, the air, and the sun are those levels of energy. All right, also in cell energy, plants use the energy and light to make those sugars. And those sugars are made out of carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so when we breathe out oxygen, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. The plants breathe out oxygen. That's where we get in our oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, and that is what the plants take in. So it all is a big cycle. So the foods can be immediately used for fuel or materials, or can be stored for later use with plants. Organisms that eat plants break down those plant structures to provide the materials and energy that they need to survive. They are consumed by other organisms. And that brings us back to the first picture with the omnivore, the carnivores, and the herbivore. All right, so energy for life. We all need energy to survive. This is a little lengthy, but this is the more important things that you need to know. But you don't need to know all the information. That's why we bulleted it. And you will go more into depth with this when you get to the high school. So the first thing about energy for life, or what you really need to know, cells use chemical reactions. And we talked about that at the beginning of the year. And those reactions change the chemical energy stored in food into forms needed to perform activities, okay? So our metabolism, some people have high metabolisms, some have lower metabolisms. And that is basically the total of all the chemical reactions in an organism, okay? The chemical reactions of the metabolism require enzymes. We've all heard photosynthesis, and photosynthesis we know that deals with plants, and that is the process that plants and other organisms use to convert light energy into chemical energy or sugars to be used as foods. Okay? We have producers and we have consumers. The producers make their own food, and consumers are the organisms that can't make their own food. We don't make our own food. We grow our own food, but we don't produce it. So we are considered consumers. We eat, okay? Chlorophyll and other pigments are used in photosynthesis to capture that light energy. That chlorophyll is within that chloroplast that we talked about in the organelle. Remember, chlorophyll and the cell wall let us know that it is a plant cell, okay? And that captures the light energy, and which is used to produce sugar and oxygen. Okay, we have respiration. That is the process in which chemical reactions break down food molecules into simpler substances and they store that energy. Okay, we have two different types, and these are not hard to remember. If you remember the beginning, so you have aerobic, then you have anaerobic. So aerobic means you use oxygen for respiration. That's when you use it. And anaerobic is when you do not use it. Easy to remember, remember that N. The N in anaerobic and the word not. Okay. So cells carry on many functions needed to sustain life. And we briefly talked about that earlier this week. But we know cells, they grow and divide. That is with that mitosis and meiosis. And they produce more cells. This requires that they take in nutrients, which they can use to provide energy for the work that cells do and make the materials that a cell or an organism needs. Okay. Also, the way in which all cells function is similar in all living organisms. Okay. Within cells, many of the basic functions of organisms, such as releasing energy from food and getting rid of waste, are carried out by different cell elements. We talked about this on Monday. You have your lysosomes, you have your ribosomes, your ER, we have your endoplasmic reticulum, the chloroplast in the plant cell, you have your cytoplasm, you have your nucleus, your nuclear membrane. Those all parts carry out a function, all right, in order to help that cell sustain its life. So matter, which we talked about earlier this year, is transferred among organisms. In any ecosystem when organisms eat or are eaten by other foods. And this is going to lead into our ecosystems unit later in the year. But we just need to know that the molecules from our food that we consume react with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water in a process called cellular respiration. Okay, we just learned about what respiration was. Okay, and get back to it. All right, we just learned what respiration was right here. Okay, process in which chemical reactions break down food molecules into simpler substances and release stored energy. We have that. We know what cells they have to. So you just have to think about putting two words together. Cellular respiration. You know what respiration is. Cellular, we know is that process. Okay, it's the reaction of everything going on. And through the process of cellular respiration, cells convert. They change their energy, which is glucose, that sugar, to a usable form of energy, and that is known as ATP. Okay, so cells use a source of energy called ATP, and ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, this energy stored in ATP provides the means for all cells to be able to carry out their function, such as growth, development, repairing the organisms, the locomotion, the movement, and the transportation of molecules across the cell membrane. So in plant and animal cells, the molecules from the food that they consume do three things. React with oxygen, and that provides the energy. Second, it builds and it becomes incorporated into the structure. And third, it's stored for later use. And that just piggybacks on the ATP, the usable source of energy. And last but not least, I'm in here. Last but not least, we have the types of compounds, and this leads into our healthful living. I know you all have covered this in health. So, the types of compounds, and it is not the same definition as we talked about compounds with in chemistry. We have two or more elements chemically combined. It's similar in a way, but not exactly. So organic compounds contain carbon, which you know is an element, and hydrogen, which is an element, and are usually associated with living things. Okay. And these things that are once were alive, the four groups of organic compounds make up all living things. Okay. So we have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, amino acids, enzymes, nucleic acids. So carbohydrates supply energy for the cell process. Lipids store and release large amounts of energy, which are our fats, our sugars. Proteins are building blocks of many substances. We know our meats, peanut butter, and our amino acids are an example of proteins. There's smaller molecules that make up the proteins. And we have our enzymes. They speed up the chemical reaction in cells. And the fourth thing is nucleic acids, and they store important coded information in our cells. So think about the word nucleus and nucleic. Okay, so the two words look very similar. The nucleus, remember, is the brain of the cell, and that controls and it codes information for that cell. Same thing. Think about that. Nucleic acids stored important coded information, and then we have our inorganic compounds, usually made from elements other than carbon. Okay. Really, we're not going to go too much into depth with inorganic carbon compounds. You'll talk about that with earth science and biology once you get to the high school. All right. So that was all of your notes. Hope you took thorough notes for your with your guided notes. Now you are going to watch your ed puzzle on mitosis and meiosis as a review, and then you should be able to have this sheet. This is your helpful living reading assignment. Okay. You are to answer the questions on a separate sheet of paper. There are only 30 copies, class copies. These need to be turned back into the substitute. You're answering the questions right here at the bottom on your separate sheet of paper. They also need to be turned into the tray on the bookcase. Okay. There is a front and the back. It is a helpful living assignment is talking about your food choices, your body health, smoking and alcohol, and drugs. Things that you already know, okay? But it's bringing a little bit of the scientific background to it, okay? Your assignment in neat and complete sentences is the following on your own sheet of paper and turning into the tray. There are 8 questions, a recall that's in the reading, and then you also have 4 questions of analyzing the reading, okay? This is due before you leave today. Ed puzzles will be due at midnight. On Monday, it will not be Ed Puzzle Monday. Monday, we're going to continue with Helpful Living. And on Tuesday, we'll be watching Charlie Brown's Christmas to wrap up our Healthy Living unit. Hope you all have a great weekend. I hope you all behave with the sub. And I hope you all, if you have any questions, email me and I will try to respond as soon as possible. Y'all have a great weekend.